The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, laughter, and wealth, but no one noticed the small boy standing in the shadows. 9-year-old Jamie wasn't on the guest list. His sleeves hung past his wrists, his shoes were scuffed, and in his hand he clutched a creased envelope meant for the most powerful man in the room, Adrian Cole, billionaire CEO. When another child sneered, telling him he didn't belong, Jamie nearly retreated, until the room fell silent. Adrian himself had seen him. What happened next would shatter every expectation in that gilded hall. The ballroom glowed under the weight of chandeliers, every crystal drop refracting light across polished marble floors and silk gowns that whispered when their owners moved. Waiters in black ties carried trays of champagne through clusters of conversation, and the steady hum of laughter and deal-making gave the air its rhythm. At the center of it all sat the long banquet table, where names printed in gold ink marked the places of power. Seats for politicians, industry giants, and heirs to fortunes so old their origin stories had become myth. But not every guest belonged to that table. At the far end of the room, near the corner where no spotlight reached, a boy stood on tiptoe trying to see. He was dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit, the sleeves too long, the collar tugging against his thin neck. His shoes were polished but scuffed at the tips, evidence that they'd belonged to someone else before him. In his hands, he clutched a small white envelope, creased from how tightly he held it. The boy's name was Jamie. He was 9 years old, and he was not on the guest list. He had arrived with his mother, a catering server in a crisp black uniform. She had begged the manager to let her son stay quietly in the back until her shift ended. There had been no one else to watch him that evening. The manager had agreed reluctantly, provided Jamie promised to stay out of sight. But children do not always stay where they are told, especially when a world of gleaming lights and endless food spreads out just a few feet away. Jamie slipped in through the service door, drawn by curiosity more than defiance. His eyes darted across the room at the sight of ice sculptures, towers of macarons, and people whose laughter rang like it belonged to another species entirely. He moved cautiously, weaving between tall adults who didn't notice him at all, until he found himself at the edge of the banquet table. There he lingered, clutching the envelope. It contained a letter he had written on lined notebook paper, folded carefully into fourths. The words inside were shaky but earnest. They were addressed to someone specific, Mr. Adrian Cole, the CEO of Cole Industries, the man hosting the event. Jamie didn't know Adrian personally, only that his mother spoke his name sometimes when bills piled high on the kitchen counter. Cole Industries owned the hotel chain where she worked long shifts, cleaning rooms. Once, Jamie had overheard her whisper to a coworker that she had never even seen the CEO's face, though the company newsletters praised him monthly. "He lives in another world," she had said, and maybe she was right. But Jamie, in the innocent logic of children, believed worlds could be bridged with a letter. So he wrote one. Now he just needed to deliver it. As Jamie inched closer to the table, he caught a sharp voice behind him. "Hey, what do you think you're doing here?" A boy only slightly older, maybe 12, stared at him with narrowed eyes. His suit fit perfectly. His shoes gleamed with new leather. He carried himself with the ease of someone used to belonging in every room. "This is for invited guests only," the older boy said, stepping in front of Jamie. "You don't belong here." Jamie froze, words trapped in his throat. The older boy smirked. "You're one of the servers' kids, aren't you? I can tell. My dad says people like you shouldn't mix with people like us. Go back to the kitchen where you came from." Heat flushed Jamie's face. He gripped the envelope tighter, his courage faltering under the weight of humiliation. Around them, adults continued their conversations, oblivious. The older boy jabbed a finger at the empty seat near the head of the table. "See that? That's reserved for someone important, not for you. If you sit there, everyone will laugh. Jamie lowered his gaze, wishing the ground would swallow him. His throat burned, but he refused to cry. Not here, not in front of the boy who told him he didn't belong. He took a small step back, retreating toward the shadows. And then a voice cut through the room. "Is there a problem here?" It was calm, deep, commanding without effort. Every head within earshot turned. The older boy stiffened immediately, color draining from his face. Because the man who had spoken was Adrian Cole himself. The CEO was taller than Jamie expected, broad-shouldered in a midnight suit that looked carved to his frame. His dark hair carried a touch of silver at the temples, and his eyes, sharp, assessing, swept over both boys before settling on Jamie. For a moment, silence held the air taut. Then Adrian stepped closer, his polished shoes whispering against marble. Jamie's fingers tightened around the envelope. The older boy stammered, No, sir, just making sure he doesn't sit where he's not supposed to." Adrian's gaze shifted to the chair in question, then back to Jamie. He studied the two long sleeves, the nervous posture, the quiet defiance beneath lowered lashes. And then Adrian did something no one expected. He reached forward, pulled the chair back, and said, "That seat is mine. But tonight, it belongs to him." Gasps fluttered around the table like startled birds. The older boy's jaw dropped, but Adrian's expression brooked no argument. He gestured for Jamie to sit. Jamie's knees trembled as he lowered himself onto the plush velvet cushion. The envelope, still clutched in his small hand, lay against his lap. Adrian adjusted the place setting with deliberate care, sliding the crystal glass within reach, straightening the cutlery. Then he rested one hand on the back of Jamie's chair, a silent shield against judgmental stares. "He belongs," Adrian said evenly, his voice carrying across the table. "And anyone who says otherwise can take it up with me." No one did. The older boy melted back into the crowd, cheeks burning with shame. Conversations resumed, but the air carried a new weight, a new awareness. At the head of the table, Adrian Cole sat not in his own seat but in the one beside Jamie, as though proximity itself was the declaration. Jamie could barely breathe. His heart thundered, his mind spinning. All he could manage was to slide the envelope onto the table, pushing it shyly toward Adrian. The CEO glanced down, then back at Jamie. "What's this?" Jamie swallowed hard. "A letter. For you." Adrian picked it up carefully, unfolding the creased paper. As his eyes scanned the shaky handwriting, something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough for those who knew him well to notice. His features softened, his brow furrowed, and for a long moment the mighty CEO seemed to forget the gala around him. The letter was short, just a few sentences. "Dear Mr. Cole, my name is Jamie. My mom works very hard for your hotels. She is the best person I know. I just want her to smile more. If you can help her not be so tired, I would be very happy. Thank you for reading my letter." The words were simple, almost painfully so, but they pierced deeper than any corporate report or glossy shareholder presentation could. Adrian folded the letter slowly, his hand tightening around it as though anchoring himself to its sincerity. When he looked back at Jamie, his voice was quiet enough that only the boy could hear. "Your mother works for me?" Jamie nodded. "What's her name?" He told him. Adrian exhaled, leaning back in his chair. For years he had built his empire on numbers, margins, and strategy, believing that caring too much slowed a man down. Yet here was a child asking for nothing but his mother's smile. And somehow it unraveled something he hadn't known was wound so tightly inside him. The gala continued around them, but for Adrian Cole, the night-head Adrian did not often feel out of place in a room, but for a moment he was aware of every pair of eyes that flicked toward him and the boy in the oversized suit. He ignored them all. With the letter folded carefully into the pocket of his jacket, he lifted his glass and poured water for Jamie before pouring his own. It was such a small act, But it made Jamie sit taller, as if water served by the hand of a millionaire transformed the glass into something royal. Dinner was announced, silver lids lifted to reveal plates arranged like paintings. Jamie's eyes widened at the sight of food he had never imagined outside of magazines. A fillet of salmon glazed with citrus, vegetables cut into perfect spirals, a bread roll that smelled warm and soft. He glanced at Adrian nervously, unsure if he was even allowed to touch it. "Go on," Adrian said gently. "Eat." The boy picked up his fork with trembling fingers. He took one small bite, then another, before hunger overcame hesitation, and he ate with quiet determination. Adrian did not miss the way Jamie's shoulders relaxed once the ache of hunger began to fade. It unsettled him. He had hosted hundreds of these galas, each one planned down to the shade of roses on the tables, yet never once had he noticed how little all of it meant to someone who simply wanted a full stomach and a mother who came home smiling instead of weary. The evening wore on, speeches rising and falling, laughter weaving through clinking glasses. Jamie said nothing, focused on the meal before him, but his presence spoke louder than anything else in the room. Adrian found his own attention drifting from investors' questions to the boy's quiet persistence. It stirred memories he had buried deep, of his own childhood in a small apartment, of a mother who had worked double shifts so he could wear clean clothes to school, of the shame he once felt sitting at tables where others whispered that he didn't belong. After dessert, when the music began and couples moved to the dance floor, Adrian leaned closer to Jamie. "Would you like to see your mother?" Jamie's eyes lit. "She's here?" Adrian nodded. "She's working tonight, isn't she? Let's go find her." He stood, offering his hand. Jamie slipped off the chair and took it without hesitation. Together they crossed the ballroom, heads turning as the sight of the powerful CEO leading a small boy by the hand silenced gossip mid-sentence. Adrian guided him through the service corridor until they found the catering team assembling trays. Jamie's mother looked up, startled. Her face flushed when she saw Adrian Cole himself standing there with her son. She nearly dropped the tray she was holding. "Mr. Cole," she stammered, I'm so sorry. He wasn't supposed to—" Adrian raised a hand, stopping her apology. "No need. He was exactly where he was meant to be." He looked at Jamie, then back at her. "You have a remarkable son." Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden. She bowed her head, torn between gratitude and embarrassment. "He shouldn't trouble you. Please, I'll take him back and—" Adrian interrupted again, his voice firm but kind. "He gave me something tonight I won't forget." He tapped the pocket where the letter rested, "and I intend to make sure neither of you regret it." For the first time all evening, Jamie's mother truly looked at him, not as an untouchable figure printed on company newsletters, but as a man standing inches away, speaking words that carried weight. Something shifted in her posture, the faintest release of the exhaustion she wore like armor. Adrian placed a hand on Jamie's shoulder. "Stay with your mother tonight. Tomorrow, come to my office. Both of you." He didn't wait for protest. With a final nod, he returned to the ballroom, leaving behind confusion, hope, and the promise of something neither of them yet understood. That night, Jamie fell asleep on a kitchen chair in the staff room, his mother's hand resting protectively over his. The envelope no longer pressed against his palm, but the absence felt less like loss and more like trust, that the man who had taken it would not let it be forgotten. Adrian Cole returned to his penthouse with noise still echoing from the gala, but the sound no longer mattered. All he heard was the simple line of a child's letter, "I just want her to smile more." For the first time in years, Adrian found he could not sleep, just changed. Adrian did not often feel out of place in a room, but for a moment he was aware of every pair of eyes that flicked toward him and the boy in the oversized suit. He ignored them all. With the letter folded carefully into the pocket of his jacket, he lifted his glass and poured water for Jamie before pouring his own. It was such a small act, but it made Jamie sit taller, as if water served by the hand of a millionaire transformed the glass into something royal. Dinner was announced, silver lids lifted to reveal plates, arranged like paintings. Jamie's eyes widened at the sight of food he had never imagined outside of magazines. A fillet of salmon glazed with citrus, vegetables cut into perfect spirals, a bread roll that smelled warm and soft. He glanced at Adrian nervously, unsure if he was even allowed to touch it. "Go on," Adrian said gently. "Eat." The boy picked up his fork with trembling fingers. He took one small bite, then another, before hunger overcame hesitation, and he ate with quiet determination. Adrian did not miss the way Jamie's shoulders relaxed once the ache of hunger began to fade. It unsettled him. He had hosted hundreds of these galas, each one planned down to the shade of roses on the tables, yet never once had he noticed how little all of it meant to someone who simply wanted a full stomach and a mother who came home smiling instead of weary. The evening wore on, speeches rising and falling, laughter weaving through clinking glasses. Jamie said nothing, focused on the meal before him, but his presence spoke louder than anything else in the room. Adrian found his own attention drifting from investors' questions to the boy's quiet persistence. It stirred memories he had buried deep, of his own childhood in a small apartment, of a mother who had worked double shifts so he could wear clean clothes to school, of the shame he once felt sitting at tables where others whispered that he didn't belong. After dessert, when the music began and couples moved to the dance floor, Adrian leaned closer to Jamie. "Would you like to see your mother?" Jamie's eyes lit. "She's here?" Adrian nodded. "She's working tonight, isn't she? Let's go find her." He stood, offering his hand. Jamie slipped off the chair and took it without hesitation. Together they crossed the ballroom, heads turning as the sight of the powerful CEO leading a small boy by the hand silenced gossip mid-sentence. Adrian guided him through the service corridor until they found the catering team assembling trays. Jamie's mother looked up, startled. Her face flushed when she saw Adrian Cole himself standing there with her son. She nearly dropped the tray she was holding. "Mr. Cole," she stammered, I'm so sorry. He wasn't supposed to, Adrian raised a hand, stopping her apology. "No need. He was exactly where he was meant to be." He looked at Jamie, then back at her. "You have a remarkable son." Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden. She bowed her head, torn between gratitude and embarrassment. "He shouldn't trouble you. Please, I'll take him back and—" Adrian interrupted again, his voice firm but kind. "He gave me something tonight I won't forget." He tapped the pocket where the letter rested. "And I intend to make sure neither of you regret it." For the first time all evening, Jamie's mother truly looked at him, not as an untouchable figure printed on company newsletters, but as a man standing inches away, speaking words that carried weight. Something shifted in her posture, the faintest release of the exhaustion she wore like armor. Adrian placed a hand on Jamie's shoulder. "Stay with your mother tonight. Tomorrow, come to my office. Both of you." He didn't wait for protest. With a final nod, he returned to the ballroom, leaving behind confusion, hope, and the promise of something neither of them yet understood. That night, Jamie fell asleep on a kitchen chair in the staff room, his mother's hand resting protectively over his. The envelope no longer pressed against his palm, but the absence felt less like loss and more like trust, that the man who had taken it would not let it be forgotten. Adrian Cole returned to his penthouse with noise still echoing from the gala, but the sound no longer mattered. All he heard was the simple line of a child's letter, "I just want her to smile more." For the first time in years, Adrian found he could not sleep. The next morning, the city woke in its usual rush. But Adrian Cole's routine was already broken. He sat in his study before dawn, the letter unfolded on the desk in front of him. He had read it a dozen times through the night, each repetition cutting deeper into the armor he wore daily. He had built his life on empire and efficiency, on balance sheets and quarterly gains, yet here was a scrap of notebook paper reminding him that behind every line of payroll there were lives, faces, families, children who noticed when their mothers no longer smiled. By 8 o'clock his assistant Grace arrived, punctual as always. She paused when she saw him still at his desk, tie loosened, eyes tired. In all her years working for Adrian, she had never once seen him begin a day so disheveled. "Rough night?" she asked carefully. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid the paper across the desk. Grace read silently, her expression shifting from curiosity to something far softer. When she looked up, her eyes were glassy. "Who wrote this?" "A boy," Adrian said. "Jamie. His mother works for one of our hotels." Grace set the paper down gently, like it might tear under too much pressure. "What do you want me to do?" "Find out everything about her. Employment records, schedule, pay, performance reviews. I want it all on my desk before lunch." Grace hesitated. "Is this a legal matter?" "No." Adrian's gaze hardened with resolve. "It's personal." By mid-morning, a folder appeared on his desk. Inside were sheets detailing the life of Elena Hayes, age 33, employed at Cole Hotels for 7 years, housekeeping department, single mother, no recorded infractions, consistently rated outstanding on performance reviews, wages barely enough to cover rent and groceries in the city. Adrian read every line twice. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. The numbers on the page told a story no gala speech ever would, and they explained exactly why a little boy had carried a letter into a ballroom and begged a stranger to make his mother smile. At 10 sharp, a knock sounded. Grace opened the door, ushering in Elena and Jamie. Elena's uniform had been replaced by a plain blouse and skirt, but the weariness in her eyes remained. She kept her hand firmly on her son's shoulder, as though bracing for reprimand. Jamie clutched the edge of her sleeve, gaze darting nervously around the vast office. Adrian rose to greet them. "Thank you for coming." Elena started to apologize again, words tumbling out about how Jamie hadn't meant to intrude, how she would accept any consequence. Adrian stopped her with a raised hand. "You don't need to apologize," he said firmly. He looked at Jamie. "Last night you gave me this letter. Do you know what it did?" Jamie shook his head. "It kept me awake until sunrise," Adrian said, "because it reminded me of something I had forgotten." Elena frowned, uncertain. "Mr. Cole, we don't want trouble. He was just trying to—" "Tell the truth," Adrian interrupted, and he succeeded. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Adrian motioned for them to sit. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "Elena, you've worked for this company 7 years. Do you know how many times your name has crossed my desk before today?" She shook her head. "Not once," he admitted. "And that is my failure, not yours. Because when I look at your record, I see dedication beyond measure. I see someone who holds more of this company together than half the men shaking my hand at that gala." Elena's eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Jamie looked up at his mother, then back at Adrian. "Can you help her smile more?" he asked softly. The simplicity of the question pierced deeper than any boardroom debate. Adrian exhaled slowly, decision already forming like steel. "Yes," he said, "and it starts today." The next morning the city woke in its usual rush, but Adrian Cole's routine was already broken. He sat in his study before dawn, the letter unfolded on the desk in front of him. He had read it a dozen times through the night, each repetition cutting deeper into the armor he wore daily. He had built his life on empire and efficiency, on balance sheets and quarterly gains, yet here was a scrap of notebook paper reminding him that behind every line of payroll there were lives, faces, families, children who noticed when their mothers no longer smiled. By 8 o'clock, his assistant Grace arrived, punctual as always. She paused when she saw him still at his desk, tie loosened, eyes tired. In all her years working for Adrian, she had never once seen him begin a day so disheveled. "Rough night?" she asked carefully. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid the paper across the desk. Grace read silently, her expression shifting from curiosity to something far softer. When she looked up, her eyes were glassy. "Who wrote this?" "A boy," Adrian said. "Jamie. His mother works for one of our hotels." Grace set the paper down gently, like it might tear under too much pressure. "What do you want me to do?" "Find out everything about her. Employment records, schedule, pay, performance reviews. I want it all on my desk before lunch." Grace hesitated. "Is this a legal matter?" "No." Adrian's gaze hardened with resolve. "It's personal." By mid-morning, a folder appeared on his desk. Inside were sheets detailing the life of Elena Hayes, age 33, employed at Cole Hotels for 7 years. Housekeeping department, single mother, no recorded infractions, consistently rated outstanding on performance reviews, wages, barely enough to cover rent and groceries in the city. Adrian read every line twice. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. The numbers on the page told a story no gala speech ever would, and they explained exactly why a little boy had carried a letter into a ballroom and begged a stranger to make his mother smile. At 10 sharp, a knock sounded. Grace opened the door, ushering in Elena and Jamie. Elena's uniform had been replaced by a plain blouse and skirt, but the weariness in her eyes remained. She kept her hand firmly on her son's shoulder, as though bracing for reprimand. Jamie clutched the edge of her sleeve, gaze darting nervously around the vast office. Adrian rose to greet them. "Thank you for coming." Elena started to apologize again, words tumbling out about how Jamie hadn't meant to intrude, how she would accept any consequence. Adrian stopped her with a raised hand. "You don't need to apologize," he said firmly. He looked at Jamie. "Last night you gave me this letter. Do you know what it did?" Jamie shook his head. "It kept me awake until sunrise," Adrian said, "because it reminded me of something I had forgotten." Elena frowned, uncertain. "Mr. Cole, we don't want trouble. He was just trying to—" "Tell the truth," Adrian interrupted, and he succeeded. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Adrian motioned for them to sit. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "Elena, you've worked for this company 7 years. Do you know how many times your name has crossed my desk before today?" She shook her head. "Not once," he admitted. "And that is my failure, not yours. Because when I look at your record, I see dedication beyond measure. I see someone who holds more of this company together than half the men shaking my hand at that gala." Elena's eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Jamie looked up at his mother, then back at Adrian. "Can you help her smile more?" he asked softly. The simplicity of the question pierced deeper than any boardroom debate. Adrian exhaled slowly, decision already forming like steel. "Yes," he said, "and it starts today." Adrian opened the folder again, sliding it across the desk so Elena could see the lines of text. 7 years, he said. "Do you know how many executives in this company have lasted that long? Fewer than half. And yet here you are, raising a son, working double shifts, carrying more weight than anyone gives you credit for. That's not just employment, that's loyalty." Elena's hands tightened on her lap. "I don't complain, I just do what's asked of me." "And more," Adrian replied. "Which is why things are going to change." Her brow furrowed. "Change how?" Adrian leaned back, his gaze steady. "First, effective immediately, your hours will be adjusted. No more back-to-back night shifts. You'll receive the promotion you should have been offered years ago, housekeeping supervisor, and with it, a salary that reflects the responsibility you already carry." Elena blinked, stunned. "Supervisor, but I don't have the qualifications." "Yes, you do," Adrian said firmly. 7 years of keeping our highest-rated property spotless, training new staff without recognition, covering when others quit mid-shift. That's qualification enough. You've been doing the job all along. It's time the title caught up with you." Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then whispered, "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Adrian answered. "Just accept it." Jamie's eyes widened with pride. He looked up at his mother, then at Adrian. Will she smile more now? Adrian felt something inside him shift again at the boy's simple, unguarded question. He nodded slowly. "Yes, Jamie, she will." Grace re-entered quietly, carrying a second file. Adrian gestured for her to place it on the desk. "This," he said, sliding it toward Elena, "is the start of something else. A scholarship program for employees' children. Full tuition for private schooling, tutoring, extracurricular activities. Your son will be the first recipient." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "Private school? Mr. Cole, I can't—" "You can," Adrian interrupted. "You've earned it. He's earned it." Jamie leaned forward, his small hands resting on the desk. "Does that mean I get to go to the same school as the kids with the shiny shoes?" Adrian allowed himself a faint smile. "Yes. And when you do, you'll remember that belonging has nothing to do with the shoes on your feet, but the strength in your heart." Elena's eyes overflowed then, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away, embarrassed, but Adrian shook his head. "Don't apologize for that either," he said softly. "You've carried too much alone. Let someone else carry it with you now." For a long time, the only sound in the room was the muffled hum of the city beyond the glass walls. Adrian sat back, watching mother and son cling to each other, feeling something unfamiliar settling over him. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't power. It was the quiet satisfaction of having done something that mattered. And it felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. Adrian rarely found himself distracted in the middle of a workday, but after Elena and Jamie left his office, the letter never left his mind. It was still folded neatly in his pocket when he sat down with board members that afternoon, still weighing on him as graphs and projections were laid across the polished oak table. Normally he devoured figures like fuel, calculating moves 3 steps ahead. But this time his gaze wandered to the window, to the city, stretching endlessly beyond. 1,000,000 lives played out below, each one carrying stories far from balance sheets. He thought of Elena, kneeling to polish hotel floors while guests passed by without a glance. He thought of Jamie, clinging to that envelope as though it was the only weapon he had. "Mr. Cole," one of the directors prompted, dragging him back to the room. Adrian straightened, his tone smooth, though his mind was elsewhere. "The projections look fine. Approve the strategy. Meeting adjourned." The men and women around the table exchanged surprised looks. They were used to grilling, to precise questions that left them scrambling. Today he waved them off in 10 minutes. It unsettled them. It unsettled him even more. By evening he was still restless. The penthouse he called home sat high above the city, filled with art collected from around the world, but it felt hollow. The letter lay on the counter. He poured himself a drink, but the burn of scotch didn't quiet the words echoing in his head. "I just want her to smile more." He barely slept again. And when dawn broke, Adrian did something unusual. He drove himself to the hotel where Elena worked. No chauffeurs, no entourage. Just him behind the wheel of a black sedan, pulling into the employee entrance. The staff froze when they saw him step out. The CEO himself, walking through the narrow corridor lined with cleaning carts and laundry bins. He moved past their startled greetings until he found her. Elena stood with a vacuum cord coiled around her arm, mid-shift, hair pulled back tightly to keep it from her face. When she looked up and saw him, the cord slipped from her fingers. "Mr. Cole?" she whispered, almost as if saying his name out loud might break the fragile reality of him being there. "I wanted to see the work you do," Adrian said. His eyes swept the hallway, the worn carpets, the scent of bleach lingering in the air. "Not from a report, not from a distance. Here." Her colleagues stared, wide-eyed, then melted back into their tasks, sensing this was not a conversation to intrude upon. Elena fumbled with words. "Sir, this isn't necessary." "It is," Adrian countered. He walked into one of the rooms she had just finished cleaning. The bed was tucked with perfect corners. The bathroom gleamed, not a hair out of place. "You've been doing this for years, quietly, efficiently, and I never knew your name." He turned back to her, voice low but firm. "That changes now." She flushed, caught between pride and embarrassment. "I just do my job." "More than that," he replied. "You carry this place." Her eyes darted down, uncomfortable under his direct gaze. "I don't need praise, Mr. Cole. I just need to make sure Jamie has food and school supplies." "And smiles," Adrian murmured. Her head snapped up. "That's what he asked me for," Adrian explained. "Not money, not toys, just for you to smile more." Elena's breath caught. Her hand flew to her mouth as though she could hold back the tears that wanted to escape. Adrian softened his tone. "I promised him it would happen, and I don't break promises." That day, Elena was quietly reassigned. Her new title, supervisor, came with an office, small but private, a pay raise large enough to erase the gnawing anxiety that had followed her for years. She protested, of course, certain there was a catch, but Adrian silenced her with one unarguable truth. "You've already earned it. I'm just making it official." For Jamie, things shifted even faster. Enrollment papers were drawn for a school where polished shoes and expensive lunches were the norm. He clutched his new backpack like a shield the first morning, eyes wide as his mother walked him through towering gates. Adrian had arranged a discreet scholarship, so no one knew which child it was meant for, only that a new boy with bright curiosity had joined their ranks. At first, Jamie didn't speak of what had happened at the gala. He carried it quietly, like a secret treasure. But slowly, as weeks passed, he told his teachers, his new friends, even himself in the mirror. "The CEO gave me his seat. He said I belong," and with each telling, his shoulders squared a little more. For Adrian, the changes rippled outward. He began to notice things he had once ignored. When he walked through his hotels, he saw not just luxury lobbies, but tired faces behind desks, maids pushing heavy carts, cooks sweating in narrow kitchens. He spoke to them, listened to them, and everywhere he went, he carried Jamie's letter as a reminder. The board noticed his shift. They whispered about distraction, about softer edges dulling his legendary precision. But quarterly reports told another story. Productivity rose, turnover dropped. Employees began to speak of loyalty not born of fear but of respect. And investors, no matter how skeptical, could not argue with numbers. Months passed. Jamie thrived in school. Elena carried herself differently, still modest, still cautious, but lighter. The lines of exhaustion around her eyes began to fade, replaced by something steadier. Hope. One evening, after another long day of decisions that finally seemed to matter, Adrian sat in his penthouse staring at the skyline. His phone buzzed. A message from Grace. "Elena Hayes is in the lobby. She says it's important." He went down himself. She stood there in a simple dress, hair loose for the first time he'd seen it. She looked nervous. "I'm sorry to come uninvited," she said quickly, "but Jamie wanted me to tell you something." Adrian frowned slightly. "Is he all right?" She smiled softly. "He's better than all right. He told me at dinner tonight. He saw me smile, really smile, and he said, 'Mom, I think Mr. Cole kept his promise.'" For a man used to markets and mergers, it was the simplest, most profound return on investment he had ever received. He exhaled, a rare crack in the armor. Then it was worth everything. Elena's eyes lingered on him, searching. For the first time, she seemed to see not just the CEO, but the man beneath, the boy he once was, perhaps, sitting at a table where others whispered he didn't belong. They stood in silence, the city buzzing beyond the glass, Until finally she said, "Thank you." 2 words, but they carried the weight of 7 years, of exhaustion eased, of a child's hope answered. Adrian nodded once. "Don't thank me, thank your son. He reminded me who I was supposed to be." And in that quiet lobby, with no chandeliers, no champagne, no golden name cards, something began, small but unshakable. It wasn't charity, it wasn't power, it was belonging. And this time Adrian Cole knew exactly what it meant. Adrian could not forget that night in the lobby, the words Elena carried from her son. Mr. Cole kept his promise. They settled deep into him, quieter than applause, heavier than profit margins. For years he had measured success in acquisitions and quarterly growth. Now a single child's sentence felt like the truest benchmark he had ever reached. But not everyone saw it that way. Within weeks, murmurs spread through the upper echelons of Cole Industries. A CEO visiting housekeeping corridors, announcing sudden promotions without protocol, establishing scholarships that drained funds from marketing budgets. To some of his executives, it looked less like vision and more like weakness. And weakness, in their world, was blood in the water. At the next board meeting, Adrian felt the shift before a word was spoken. Men and women in tailored suits sat straighter, their eyes sharper, their smiles tighter. The usual rhythm of presentations faltered. Directors exchanged subtle glances, waiting for someone else to begin the confrontation. It was Charles Renwick, head of finance, who finally spoke. His voice was smooth, carefully measured. "Mr. Cole, while no one questions your authority, some recent initiatives have raised concern." Adrian steepled his fingers. "Go on." Renwick clicked a pen nervously, though his tone remained polished. "Promotions granted outside standard vetting, significant scholarship funds allocated without board approval. These decisions, while admirable, set precedents that could destabilize corporate discipline." Adrian's gaze swept the table, reading the hesitation in each set of eyes. "What you're saying," he replied evenly, "is that compassion doesn't fit on your balance sheets." "Not compassion," another director interjected quickly. "Protocol, structure. You built this empire on rules, Mr. Cole, rules everyone trusted. We worry that bending them for one employee, however deserving, undermines that foundation." Silence pressed in. Adrian could feel the weight of their expectation, that he would yield, apologize, retreat into the ruthless precision they admired. But he had Jamie's letter in his jacket pocket. He reached for it now, unfolding the creased paper with deliberate calm. The directors leaned forward, confused. He read aloud, "I just want her to smile more." Murmurs rippled around the table, some shifted uncomfortably. Renwick frowned. "With respect, sir, what does a child's note have to do with corporate governance?" Adrian folded the letter again, sliding it into his pocket. "Everything, because this company is not glass towers and gala speeches. It is people. Thousands of them. If one boy believes his mother's only chance at happiness is through a letter to a stranger, then we are failing, and I will not lead a company that fails its own." The words struck like steel. No one argued further, though the air bristled with resistance. Adrian dismissed the meeting with a wave, but he knew this battle was not over. Some would whisper about softness, about distraction. Let them. He had chosen his course. Outside the boardroom, Grace matched his stride. "They'll push back harder," she warned. "Then let them push," Adrian replied. "I'm not moving." That evening he visited Elena and Jamie. Their apartment was modest, 2 rooms tucked above a laundromat. The walls smelled faintly of detergent, the furniture worn but clean. Jamie rushed to the door when Adrian knocked, his smile wide enough to light the dim hallway. "You came," the boy exclaimed, tugging Adrian inside. Elena stood from the small kitchen table, startled but composed. "Mr. Cole, this is unexpected." "I was in the neighborhood," Adrian lied gently. Jamie laughed. We're not in your neighborhood. Adrian allowed himself a rare chuckle. No, I suppose we're not. They ate together that night. Simple pasta Elena had made, the kind of meal Adrian hadn't tasted in years. He listened as Jamie recounted his first weeks at the new school, how some children welcomed him while others sneered at his second-hand backpack. Adrian noted each detail carefully, filing it away like a strategy. When Jamie finally drifted to sleep on the couch, Elena cleared the dishes in silence. She moved with practiced efficiency, but Adrian saw the faint tremor in her hands, the way she paused once, staring at her son's sleeping face. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said quietly. Her eyes lifted to his, searching. "Why? You don't even know us." He hesitated, then spoke the truth. "Because once I was him, a boy who didn't belong, and someone gave me a chance. If they hadn't, I wouldn't be here. This," he gestured to the small apartment, to the sleeping child, "is more familiar to me than you think." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Thank you." 2 words again, but heavier this time. Not gratitude for charity, but for recognition, for being seen. The weeks turned into months. Jamie flourished, slowly shedding the hesitancy that had once defined him. He joined the school's debate team, his voice small but steady. When he stumbled, he remembered the man who had given him a seat and kept his promise, and he straightened his shoulders. Elena, too, began to change. As supervisor, she carried authority she had never believed she'd hold. Younger staff looked to her for guidance. Guests complimented the new warmth of the housekeeping team. Her paychecks stretched further, enough to replace broken shoes, to add fresh fruit to the table, to cover school trips without fear. Adrian visited often, always discreetly. Sometimes to review scholarship reports, sometimes to drop off books for Jamie, sometimes for no reason at all. He found himself drawn back to the apartment above the laundromat more than to the penthouse high above the skyline. But shadows lingered. Renwick and his allies on the board began maneuvering quietly, questioning Adrian's leadership in whispers that reached the media. An article appeared in a financial journal. "Has compassion weakened the Iron CEO?" The photograph showed Adrian at a school fundraiser, Jamie standing proudly at his side. Adrian's advisors urged damage control, a crafted statement, a retreat into polished distance. But he refused. "Let them print what they want. I'd rather be accused of compassion than remembered for indifference." The fight escalated. At the next shareholders' meeting, Renwick made his move, presenting graphs that twisted Adrian's initiatives into losses, framing scholarships and wage increases as liabilities. Murmurs swept the room. For a moment it seemed the empire Adrian had built could turn on him. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened. Jamie stepped in, clutching another envelope. Elena followed, pale but resolute. Adrian froze, shock rippling through him as the boy marched to the stage. Security hesitated, but Adrian raised a hand, stopping them. Jamie climbed the steps, small legs determined, and held out the envelope. "I wrote another letter," he announced into the microphone, his voice carrying across the stunned hall. Adrian took it, unfolding the paper with trembling fingers. The handwriting was neater this time, more confident. "Dear Mr. Cole, thank you for helping my mom smile. Thank you for making me believe I belong. Please don't stop, because there are other kids like me, and other moms like her, and they need you too." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, applause. It began in the back, where employees in uniform had slipped into the room to watch. It spread slowly, unevenly, until even shareholders found themselves clapping, some awkwardly, some with genuine conviction. Renwick's arguments wilted under the sound. His charts lay forgotten. Adrian folded the letter and placed it in his jacket. He looked out at the room, his voice steady. "This company will not measure success by how much we take, but by how much we give. If that costs me this seat, so be it. But I will not betray the trust of a child who believes we can do better." The applause swelled, and in that moment, Adrian knew. The boy who once had no seat at the table had given him more power than any shareholder ever could. The storm around Adrian Cole did not quiet easily. The applause at the shareholders' meeting had silenced Renwick for a day, but men like him did not surrender. Within a week, new articles appeared questioning Adrian's judgment, whispering that emotion had clouded the once unshakable CEO. Some investors threatened to withdraw, murmuring about instability. For the first time in a decade, analysts predicted turbulence for coal industries. But turbulence did not frighten Adrian. He had weathered worse in his climb to the top. What unsettled him now was not the thought of losing power, but the possibility of failing those who had come to trust him, Elena, Jamie, and the hundreds of unseen faces who looked to him with new hope. One evening he sat in his office long after the lights had dimmed across the city. The skyline glittered like jewels, but his focus rested on two letters laid out before him. Jamie's first, written in shaky hand. Jamie's second, read before a hall of shareholders. He traced the words slowly, absorbing them like vows carved into stone. Grace entered quietly, a stack of reports in her hands. She paused when she saw him bent over the letters. "They're watching you," she said softly, some with knives drawn, others with eyes full of expectation. "Whatever you do next will decide everything." Adrian looked up, his expression carved with resolve. "Then it's time to stop talking about compassion and start proving it works." The next morning, he announced sweeping reforms: a new benefits program for employees, expanded scholarships, a health fund for workers' families. Renwick and his allies fumed, but Adrian moved with precision, securing support from communities, from media outlets hungry for stories of hope, from employees who now spoke of him as more than a name on a paycheck. The empire shifted, not crumbling, but transforming. Through it all, Elena remained cautious. When Adrian visited her office at the hotel, she stood straighter, shoulders squared, unwilling to appear weak. Yet he saw the changes in her, the steadier tone when she gave instructions, the quiet pride when staff turned to her for guidance. "You're thriving," Adrian observed one afternoon. She shook her head quickly. "I'm surviving, that's all." "No," he said. "You've moved beyond survival. You're building." Her eyes flickered with something unspoken, but she turned back to her papers, unwilling, or perhaps afraid, to let him see it. Jamie, meanwhile, grew into his new school with surprising resilience. The boy who once whispered at the edges now raised his hand in class, joined games at recess, even stood in front of his peers during debate practice. When he faltered, he remembered the moment Adrian had given him a seat at the table, and he pressed forward. One crisp autumn morning, Adrian attended Jamie's debate competition. He sat quietly at the back of the auditorium, unnoticed by most, his dark suit blending with the shadows. Jamie stood at the podium, voice trembling at first, then growing firmer as he spoke about fairness, about courage, about how one voice could change more than people expected. Adrian felt pride swell, foreign and disarming. He had sat through countless presentations, but none struck him like the sight of that boy facing down a crowd with nothing but his words. Afterward, Jamie ran to him, grinning. "Did I do okay?" "You did more than okay," Adrian said, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "You proved something." "What's that?" "That you belong anywhere you decide to stand." Jamie's smile widened, and in that moment, Adrian knew the boy would never again shrink from the world. But the world had not finished testing them. Renwick made his final play in winter, calling for a vote of no confidence. He arrived armed with numbers, claiming Adrian's reforms drained resources, painting him as reckless. The boardroom buzzed with tension as votes were cast. Adrian sat silent, not defending himself with charts or strategies. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed both of Jamie's letters on the table. "This is my defense," he said. "If you believe numbers matter more than this, then remove me. But understand, you're not just voting against me. You're voting against every worker whose children wait for them at night. You're voting against the very soul of this company." The room stilled. When the final tally came, the board had sided with Adrian. Not unanimously, Renwick and his circle voted against him, but enough to secure his place. Renwick resigned the next day, his departure quiet but bitter. News spread fast. Headlines no longer questioned Adrian's compassion, they praised it. The CEO who chose people over profit. His reputation, once built on steel and precision, was reborn in flesh and blood. For Elena and Jamie, life continued to shift. Their apartment above the laundromat gave way to a brighter space closer to Jamie's school. Elena's smile came more often, hesitant at first, then freer. Jamie thrived, no longer carrying the weight of being unseen. One evening, as snow drifted past the windows, Adrian joined them for dinner. The table was simple, the food modest, but laughter filled the room. Jamie leaned against his mother, content, while Adrian sat across from them, watching with quiet awe. Elena caught his gaze and held it. "You've changed everything," she said softly. Adrian shook his head. "No, he did. One boy with one letter reminded me what mattered. I only listened." For a long moment they sat in silence, the kind that feels less like absence and more like peace. And as the snow fell heavier, Adrian realized something he had never admitted aloud. The night he gave a little boy his seat, he had not just offered a place at the table. He had found his own. Spring arrived with a softness that made the city seem newly washed, the air carrying traces of lilac from rooftop gardens and laughter from sidewalks that had spent a winter hunched against wind. On a Saturday morning, bright enough to feel like a promise, Jamie ran down the stairs of their new building, 2 at a time, his backpack thumping against his spine. The front door swung open, and he burst into a world where the sun found every window and made it gleam. Adrian waited by the curb, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a paper cup of hot chocolate steaming in one hand and coffee in the other. He lifted them like offerings. Jamie took the hot chocolate with reverence, careful not to spill a drop on the new blue sweater Elena had insisted he wear. "Ready?" Adrian asked. Jamie nodded vigorously. "Mom says I shouldn't talk too fast when I'm nervous. You don't have to talk at all if you don't want to." Jamie scrunched his face. "But I want to. Mrs. Chen said I could read the piece I wrote." "Then we'll listen," Adrian said, and something in his voice made Jamie stand taller. They walked toward the school, a clean-lined building that still smelled faintly of new paint and possibility. Parents gathered in clusters near the steps, greeting one another with the familiarity of routine. A few nodded at Adrian, their eyes flicking with recognition. Headlines had made him visible to them, but visibility wasn't the same as belonging. He knew that, and it didn't bother him. Inside, the auditorium hummed with chatter. A banner stretched across the stage. Community Day, words that build. Children stood in small packs, clutching pages and whispering lines. A teacher moved from group to group with the grace of someone navigating a river of small currents. Elena arrived a few minutes after them, cheeks flushed from walking quickly. Her hair, which she often kept pulled back, fell loose against her shoulders. When she saw Jamie, her mouth softened into the smile he'd first asked the world for. She kissed the top of his head, then glanced at Adrian. "Thank you for coming." "You're the one who got him here on time," Adrian replied easily. "I had help," she said, tilting her head toward him, and he felt the warmth of a small private acknowledgement settle between them. They found seats halfway up the aisle. Children read poems about neighborhoods and courage and dogs that would not stop barking. Parents clapped too loudly, as parents do. A little girl in a daisy yellow dress forgot her lines and started to cry, but the audience hummed her to calm with soft encouragement until the words found their way back. When Jamie stepped to the microphone, he held his page carefully, as if it were something alive. He swallowed, looked up, and found the 2 faces he needed, his mother's steady as ground, Adrian's steady as a lighthouse. He began to read. "My name is Jamie. I used to think rooms had rules that were invisible, like some people were born knowing where to stand and what to say, and the rest of us had to learn it on our own. One night I went into a room where I didn't belong and somebody told me to leave, but then a man gave me his seat, and I learned that sometimes rules are just habits that need to be broken." My mom smiles more now, and when she does, the whole room changes. If you see someone standing at the door, you can make space. If you see someone crossing their arms, you can uncross your own. Sometimes belonging is one chair away. He looked up from the page, breathless in the way of someone who has spoken the truth for the first time out loud. The room was quiet for a heartbeat that felt longer than time. And then applause rose, gentle at first, then steady, then everywhere. Jamie's eyes shone. He folded his paper neatly and stepped down, shoulders squared in a way that told Adrian the boy would never again be mistaken about where he could stand. After the assembly, parents shook Adrian's hand and squeezed Elena's. A boy hovered at the edge of the crowd, his hair combed so precisely it reflected light. He was older than Jamie, perhaps 12, and he wore the wary look of someone who expects to be scolded. He approached, cleared his throat, and stared at the floor. "Jamie," he said, I'm sorry about the party." Jamie blinked. It took him a second to place the face. The boy who had told him to go back to the kitchen. That night lived in him like a scar mostly healed. He looked at Elena, then at Adrian. They said nothing, gave no signal. This decision belonged to him. "Okay," Jamie said after a moment. "Thanks," the boy swallowed. "I didn't understand." "Me neither," Jamie admitted. "Until I did." They looked at each other, two kids holding the fragile beginnings of understanding between them. It was not friendship, not yet, but it wasn't its opposite either. It was a door left unlocked. Spring gathered itself into summer. The city opened its windows. Coal industries opened its books. The reforms Adrian had pushed moved from press releases to practice. Scholarships quietly multiplied. A child care stipend trimmed the edges off impossible schedules. A health fund paid for dentistry that made laughter less shy. When the press asked why he was so bold, Adrian said only, "People perform their best when they're treated like people." Numbers did what numbers always do when you invest where it matters. They came back stronger. Not everything was gentle. A lawsuit trickled in from a former executive who claimed wrongful termination and who used words like virtue signaling as if kindness were a legal offense. Rumors circled and then fell away when the facts did not oblige their spin. Through it, Adrian moved with a kind of spare elegance, cutting away that which did not serve and building where something new could stand. Elena learned how to hire slowly and well, how to put the right hands in the right places. She learned, with a reluctance that turned into skill, how to let people fail safely and then lift them toward better. When a new housekeeper cried in the supply closet because she'd broken a vase in a suite where breaking anything felt like breaking the world, Elena sat on the tile beside her and said, "We'll fix it. We fix things here." Later, she filled out a replacement form and requested sturdier vases. Small decisions rippled outward. One afternoon, she found a bouquet on her small office desk. Nothing extravagant, just white flowers wrapped in brown paper, tied with a length of blue ribbon that looked like it had been cut from something else. No card. She suspected the sender, but she did not call to ask. The flowers scented the week like a quiet secret. Jamie grew quickly the way children grow in the presence of belief. He outpaced his homework and discovered he liked questions that did not have a single answer. He joined a robotics club because a teacher said he had the hands for it, patient and careful. At night, he sometimes fell asleep on their couch with a book open across his chest, and Elena would lift him to bed with the knowing ache of a mother who understands there are only so many times left to carry a child who is learning how to carry himself. On a day that pressed warmth against every surface, Adrian took them to a park across the river. Not the manicured kind with hedges clipped into ornaments, but the old kind, with oaks that looked like they had listened to a century of secrets and a pond with a patient surface. They laid a blanket in the grass, people walked dogs and held hands, and argued gently about where to go for dinner. A violin drifted from somewhere not visible. Adrian watched Elena untie the ribbon from Jamie's sandwich and tie it in her hair as a joke. Watched Jamie chase a paper airplane until it lifted out of reach and found the sky without him. "You never told me about your mother," Elena said when the shadows had lengthened. The question was soft, not a demand. Adrian traced a seam in the blanket with his finger. "She worked nights, at a diner. I learned the shapes of rooms by how they sounded at 3 a.m. He smiled without humor. "She thought success meant distance. If I could get high enough, I'd be safe." "And were you?" "For a while." He looked toward Jamie throwing sticks to an imaginary dog. "Then I realized safety feels like silence when no one knows your name. Turns out belonging is louder." Elena nodded like she understood something she'd felt for years, but never named. "I didn't think anyone would ever see me at work. Not really see me. I was a pair of hands that made things clean. That was enough until it wasn't." She turned the ribbon around her finger. "You made space." "You asked for it," he said, or he did. They fell quiet, watching. Many moments in their orbit arrived with the sense of being both ordinary and irreversible. This was one. A child at the edge of a pond, 2 adults learning how to stand where their lives overlapped without fear of falling. That summer, the company launched something no one expected: a hospitality training academy, free to employees and their families, that taught front-of-house work and computer skills and English as a second language. The first cohort met in a converted ballroom that used to host tastings of wines no one could pronounce. Now it hosted people learning how to introduce themselves without shrinking. Elena stood at the front on the first day and told the truth. "I scrubbed 1,000 floors before I saw one for what it was. A place other people could dance. You deserve the steps too." They clapped, not because it was a speech, but because it was a beginning. Jamie sat in the back, swinging his legs, watching his mother claim a space she'd once dusted. He felt something in his chest expand in a way that was both familiar and new. Pride had its own dimension, and he stepped into it. Newspaper articles arrived again, warmed by photographs of students in the academy wearing name tags with their names spelled correctly. Investors grew louder with praise. Renwick's replacement liked numbers so much he had learned to like what created them. Grace took a vacation for the first time in 8 years and returned looking like a curtain had been lifted from a window inside her. One evening, when the city yawned itself toward night, Adrian climbed the stairs to the roof of his building. He hadn't been up there in months. He used to go to measure the distance he'd traveled, from the neighborhood where names were the color of their work shirts to the view where names were engraved on steel. Now he went because he needed the kind of quiet that had room in it. He'd almost reached the top when the door below him opened and footsteps followed, light and unhurried. Elena stepped out, hair lifted by the night's breeze. She didn't explain how she'd gotten past the doorman or why she knew he'd be here. She just came to stand beside him. "You used to come here when you needed to leave the earth," she guessed. "And now I come to return to it," he said. They stood at the parapet as taxis braided light down the avenues and the river dreamed itself to the sea. She placed her hand on the wall. He placed his near it without touching. It felt like the kind of closeness people write about when they have run out of other words. "Jamie asked me today if you were famous," Elena said finally, smiling. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were important in the way that helps, not in the way that hurts." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh if he'd allowed it. That is the best thing anyone has ever said about me." "You earned it." She looked out over the city. "Are you happy?" He considered how to answer a question that is part inventory and part hope. "I'm learning the shape of it." "That counts," she said. "It counts a lot." In early autumn, the hotel where Elena worked hosted a benefit dinner, not for shareholders or politicians, but for the training academy, the scholarship fund, the health program. The ballroom shone, but with a different kind of light, warmer, less interested in impressing and more intent on welcoming. Name cards rested beside plates, but many were handwritten in careful script. There were no velvet ropes and no corner where people were made to wait. The first seat at the head table was left empty, a deliberate space. Guests drifted in, housekeepers in their best dresses, bellmen in suits they had borrowed and made their own, line cooks with calloused hands scrubbed clean. In one corner, a small group of executives stood, newly aware of the strangeness of their own nervousness. Grace moved through the room like a conductor, ensuring every instrument had its place to enter. Jamie walked beside Adrian and Elena. Wearing a tie he looked at with suspicion, but endured. He glanced at the empty chair. "Who's that for?" he asked. "For anyone who needs it," Adrian said. "We're going to start a new habit." When the room settled and glasses chimed softly, Adrian stood. He didn't walk to a podium. He didn't need height to be heard. He spoke from the head table, palms flat against the linen, voice carrying the clean edge of someone who has decided that the truth will do. "When I was a boy," he said, "I learned that doors are not just wood and hinges. They are people who either open or close them. I grew up wanting to build doors no one could close. Somewhere along the way, I built walls by accident. A child reminded me. He walked into a room where he had been told he did not belong and asked for something that should have been his to begin with, his mother's smile." He gestured toward Jamie, who tried to look as if he hadn't just become the brightest point in the room. "I gave him my seat," Adrian continued. "It changed us both. Tonight, that first chair is empty on purpose. It belongs to whoever is told they don't belong somewhere else. When you see someone standing at the edge, you will remember what this space means, and you will make room." He didn't ask for applause, but it came anyway, the kind that doesn't break a moment but settles around it. Elena didn't like microphones, but when Adrian asked if she wanted to speak, she surprised herself by nodding. She stood, fingertips resting on her place card as if to anchor herself. "I worked in this building for 7 years before I realized it could also be mine," she said simply. "Not the chandeliers or the china, but the ground it stands on. The ground belongs to anyone willing to keep standing. If you're here tonight, you've been standing a long time. I see you, we see you. That's all I came to say." It was not a long speech. It did not need to be. The room carried it. As the evening curved toward its end, a latecomer hovered by the door, uncertain, hand pressed against the jamb. The way someone touches a frame before they decide to enter. She wore a faded coat that did not match the season. Her eyes flicked over the tables, the plates, the people who seemed to belong. She took one step inside and stopped. Jamie noticed first. He tugged at Adrian's sleeve. Adrian followed the boy's gaze, then walked to the doorway, without hurry, without flourish. When he reached her, he said something too quiet to hear from the table. The woman shook her head as if to say no, as if to apologize for having made a mistake by standing where she stood. Adrian nodded once, then did what he had done before. He motioned toward the head table and walked with her, as if escorting the most honored guest of the night. People turned. Not one person looked away. He pulled back the empty chair. "This is yours," he said, loud enough this time for the nearest tables to hear. The woman sat, hands trembling, confusion and relief and hunger passing over her face so quickly they blurred into something like awe. A server appeared with a plate. Elena reached for a water pitcher with the ease of 1,000 repetitions and filled a glass. Jamie slid the basket of rolls closer. Grace, from across the room, gave the tiniest nod. The room adjusted itself around one more person, the way a living thing breathes to make space for air. Later, when music softened conversation and the night had taken on that particular golden sheen that happens when people have stopped pretending they aren't moved, Jamie leaned his elbow on the table and looked at Adrian. "Will you always do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Give your seat." "If someone needs it," Adrian said. "Yes, but what if you need it?" Adrian looked at Elena. She looked back. The ribbon she'd tied in her hair months ago, now woven into a simple bracelet at her wrist. He thought of roofs and ponds and supply closets and classrooms and letters read into microphones. He thought of a life measured not by the altitude of a penthouse, but by the length of a table. "I won't need it," he said, and he meant it. "I have other places to sit." Jamie considered that, nodded, and then, as children do, shifted to something else. Could he have another dessert? Did grown-ups ever get tired of clapping? Would the academy teach a class on robots that clean their own rooms? Elena laughed, a sound that had once been rare and was now frequent enough to feel like a language. After the guests had gone and the staff had begun their careful work of returning a room to its skin, Adrian and Elena walked slowly down the hotel corridor. The carpet muted their footsteps. Somewhere, a vacuum hummed. Somewhere, a door clicked shut. They didn't speak, the kind of quiet between them made not of fear, but of fullness. At the service entrance, they found a bench where the night air edged the cool side of comfortable. Elena sat. Adrian remained standing for a moment, then sat too, leaving space that wasn't distance. A delivery truck sighed as it took a curve and settled at the loading bay. "I used to sit out here on my break," Elena said, "when it was too loud inside my head." "What did you think about?" "How to keep going." She smiled, a little crooked. "Now I sit here because it's quiet in the best way." He let his shoulder touch the wall behind them, let the night do the talking for a breath or two. "Do you ever worry it will go away?" "The quiet?" She considered. "Sometimes. But then I remember I know how to make it. That's different than waiting for it." He turned that over in his mind like a coin you keep because it feels good in your hand. "I like your measurements better than mine." "You can keep yours," she said. "Just add some new ones." He did not reach for her hand. He did not need to. There are gestures that speak loudly because they are not made. They sat until the air decided it was time to be colder. When they rose, he walked her to the curb and they waited for a cab together like two people who had lived more lives than most and had somehow found the beginning of another. On a different morning, one with a sharper sky, Adrian returned to the school to deliver something he called a donation and thought of as a promise. The library got new shelves, and the shelves got new books, and the new books got new names written on little cards, because he remembered the first time a librarian had said, "This can be yours for a while," and how it had felt like being trusted with fire. Jamie led him through the stacks and explained the complex rules of library etiquette with the authority of a small boy who loves order slightly more than he loves chaos. At the end of a row, they found the librarian, Mrs. Chen, who nodded at Adrian with gratitude that did not spill into praise. On her desk sat a jar for sharpened pencils and a paper crane and a note written in a child's careful block letters. "Thank you for seats and words." Adrian read it, felt something simultaneously lift and settle, and did what he had learned was always the right next thing. He looked for whoever stood nearest the edge and stepped toward them. The city kept moving. It always would. Elevators carried people up and down. Kitchens warmed and cooled. Linen closets exhaled their peculiar breath of clean. The academy sent its first class into the world wearing uniforms that fit because they had been measured twice. A little boy wrote fewer letters and more stories because he discovered that asking for one thing had opened a door to everything. And on nights when the hotel lights softened to amber and the street gave up its traffic to quiet, A woman sat with a man on a bench near a service entrance and learned the rhythm of 2 heartbeats at rest. The bench never made it into any article. The bench never wanted to. It held its weight, and the weight they set on it with the same gentleness it offered to anyone who needed a place to stop. If you stood under the right patch of sky and listened, you might have heard the bench say what the letters had said in different words. You belong.